Today we got some more actual history about one of the last Comanche raids along the Texas frontier. This occurred back in 1868 near the county line, separating Denton from Cooke counties near Pilot Point. We'll be reading from this book, Indian Depredations in Texas, by J.W. Wilbarger. This book was published all the way back in 1889. So today's story is about the Manasco and Sheegog families. These families had roots in Alabama, Tennessee, and Indiana, and they settled in Navarro County, Texas, before moving north near Pilot Point in 1858, which was at that time on the Texas frontier, where Comanches and Kiowas were often still raiding. These two families lived for about 10 years without falling victim to Indian depredations, but on January 5, 1868, they found themselves caught in the path of a group of 300 Comanche warriors who were on what would be their last Indian raid into Cooke County, Texas. At the time this narrative commences, the counties of Denton and Cooke were sparsely settled, and buffalo, deer, bear, antelope, and other wild game roamed at will over the beautiful prairies, and sought shelter from the scorching rays of the sun during the summer, and the cold northers in the winter, in the forests that lined the streams in the far-famed cross-timbered belt. Frequent incursions were made by the wild Indian tribes of the upper Red River Valley, from the early settlement down as late as 1868, when the last great raid was made by a band of the Comanches, estimated at 300 strong. Among the early pioneers who endured the hardships and trials to secure a home in the sunny clime of Texas, and who now, as of 1888, is an esteemed and prosperous farmer residing near Pilot Point, was Mr. D.G. Manasco, who gave the writer of these sketches a thrilling account of his experience in the last great Indian raid mentioned above, and which we will now proceed to narrate. In the winter of 1858, Mr. Manasco married Miss Sophia Brown, daughter of Judge Brown of Navarro County, and with his young wife located early in January 1859 on Clear Creek, near the county line which separates Denton from Cooke, about 25 miles west or a little north of west from Pilot Point. There were at the time of the settlement occasional Indian raids by small bands, not sufficiently alarming to drive the hardy pioneers from their homes, their chief purpose being to stealthily drive away the settlers' horses, massacre those who perchance came in their way, and a great many fell victims to their brutal savagery. In the year of 1861, the father, mother, brother, and sister of Mr. Manasco arrived from Arkansas, and shared his home and hospitality. Himself and brother enlisted in the Confederate service, leaving their families in the care and protection of the father. During their absence, the mother died. At the close of the fratricidal strife, Mr. Manasco came home and engaged in the pursuits of farm life. During the period of his army life, the Indians continued to make frequent incursions into the vicinity of his new home, but happily without molestation to his family. Hoping that in the near future times would grow better, and the government afford them protection against the Indians, they resolved with heroic purpose to defend their homes. The Indians continued their depredations, killing many persons and stealing stock, till it appeared as if they would be forced to abandon their homes and the country. Then for a period there was a cessation of the hostile incursions, until the beginning of the year 1868, when suddenly on the 5th of January began the last memorable raid, in which more than 300 painted warriors took part. The attack being unexpected, the citizens were unprepared to resist the overwhelming number. Mr. Manasco and his brother-in-law, Captain Sheegog, who had married the sister named Lizzie, were absent from home on the day mentioned. Mr. Manasco's two oldest children, Lizzie and May, were visiting their aunt, Mrs. Sheegog, whose home was 1 mile west of Manasco's. Hearing that the Indians were in the country, the father of Mr. Manasco went to Captain Sheegog's home to bring his daughter and grandchildren over to Mr. Manasco's for safety and better protection. While returning, the Indians came upon and surrounded the fleeing party, killing outright the grandfather by shooting him down, making captives of the others. The weather for that season of the year being warm, they were thinly clad. The capture occurred about 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday. The captured party consisted of Mrs. Sheegog and her child, but 18 months old, Lizzie and May Manasco aged respectively 6 and 4 years. The Indians then crossed over the creek and surrounded Mr. Manasco's dwelling with the usual demoniacal yells and whoops, threatening momentarily to enter the house and capture the inmates, while Mrs. Manasco, with heroic courage, born of a mother's love, defended, gun in hand, her fireside, while at the same time, with a thrill of horror, she beheld her two oldest children in possession of the Indians. After maintaining a threatening attitude for some time, the Indians withdrew, taking with them the horses found in the lot. Mr. Manasco and Captain Sheegog returned in time, and from a distance looked upon the thrilling heroism displayed by Mrs. Manasco and the departure of the Indians, taking an easterly course. After traveling about 3 miles, they killed the little child of Mrs. Sheegog by dashing its brains out against a tree in the presence of the mother. The Indians then pursued their way, passing through the town of Gainesville to a point 6 miles east, then turning, retraced their way through the town, camping 1 mile west and waiting for daylight, the moon having gone down. The latter part of the night was dark. During the night, a severe norther came up, and just before day, Mrs. Sheegog escaped and wended her way, almost frozen, to the house of Sam Dorris, where she was kindly received and cared for by the sympathizing family. At daybreak, the Indians started on westward. After going 7 miles west of Gainesville, or 6 miles from where they had camped, they left the two little children of Mrs. Manasco. The remains of one was found 1 month, and the other 3 months afterward. It is supposed that they were frozen to death. Soon afterward, Mr. Manasco and Captain Sheegog removed to Pilot Point, where they have since resided. Captain Sheegog and wife have since died. Mr. Manasco and his noble wife are still honored citizens of Denton County. So that's it for this episode on the last Comanche raid into Cooke County, Texas, back in January of 1868. This attack also extended into Denton County. One other source I found states that these were Kiowa rather than Comanche Indians. It's possible that it was a group composed of both Comanches and Kiowas. These stories and Indian depredations in Texas are often very short, but also very intense, and sometimes slightly disturbing. The one silver lining in this story is that Mrs. Sheegog was able to escape during a frigid blue norther, but the tragic part is that 3 children were killed as a result of this raid. These areas north and west of Dallas were still on the Indian frontier in 1868, whereas places in east or central Texas were outside of the Comanche raiding zone by that time. J.W. Wilbarger wrote this book, Indian Depredations in Texas, as an old man after he had been one of the first pioneer settlers in the days of the Republic of Texas. His own brother Josiah Wilbarger had been scalped, but survived, and he had witnessed countless other attacks from Indians throughout his time in Texas. As he grew older, he realized that the stories of the struggles of the early Texas pioneers with marauding Indians were in danger of being lost, so he made it his mission to write down every story he could about the Indian depredations against the early Texas settlers. He spent about 20 years collecting these stories until his final work was published in 1889. As he says, "I felt impelled to prepare and publish, for the benefit of another generation, this volume, which shows something of the dangers and difficulties under which the peace that our people now enjoy has been secured." This channel is called Unworthy History because we talk about actual history that is now deemed unworthy to discuss on history channels on TV. Much of our history is now being lost because those who profess to be its stewards have abandoned their mission. Similar to J.W. Wilbarger, I feel impelled to present these stories of our past for the benefit of another generation. This unworthy history is shunned and forgotten by our elite intellectuals and institutions of the day, but here on this channel, we keep this unworthy history alive by reading words written down long ago, directly from old books. If you have the means and you'd like to support the mission of this channel, then consider joining our Patreon page. Patreon members will have their chosen name listed at the end of each episode. So if you want to see more episodes like this, then be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Unworthy History.